Hey guys, I want to talk to you a little bit about value outlining and how that's different and similar to what we were doing for our fact claims or our trial speeches. So I've got the same handout here that has how an outline works to kind of review that so you don't have to go searching around to find the old one. But I want to jump down here to our value outline. And you notice the format is very similar. I want to make sure that that kind of holds in place here. I've done a couple of things differently here, and I'm just going to explain a little bit about that and then get into the structure of the outline and the argument. So first has to do with citations. And I'm just going to kind of mark on here as I go through how I'm citing my sources. So I went ahead and used footnotes in this outline. So you can see as I start using a source, I'm using the footnotes for that source. So if I use a source up here and I cite it at that level, what that means is that anything that follows that uses specific information all comes from that same source. Now, similar here, Washington worked hard in school. I cite my source there. And what I'm saying when I cite my source at that level is that this information that's below it is from a different source. And I don't start using, or is from the same source. I don't start using a different source until I cite this new one. And that implies that everything that follows from it as like a paragraph is using the same source. So that's where my sources are. And you see when I put in footnotes, all that does is it indicates kind of which source I'm using down here. So I'm showing which source I'm using, just kind of it makes it easier to flow in the outline without putting in parenthetical citation. If instead you want to use parenthetical citation that's used in like APA or MLA formats, you would include instead of this information, and I'm just going to kind of use white to block those out. So I'm taking out those. And if I wanted to actually cite that information in parenthetical citation, then I would put in my author, which I think in this case is Mills. And these are all made up authors. And then what page did I use? I used page 5 for that source. So of an APA format, then I would put 5, and I'd put my period there at the end of it, using the same kind of citation format. Now, if I was using APA, if you're familiar with that at all, Mills wrote his book in 2003, and so instead of using all of that information, I'm going to go ahead and erase those. Then I would put Mills and I would put 2003. I don't need my comma anymore. And because I'm not using a specific quotation, I'm not going to put in a page number with that. So there's just some different optional formats with that. Like I've said before, I'm not super interested or concerned about your citation format style, as long as you use something consistent that is easy to determine where you got your information. And in the end, I want you to make sure that you have a works cited page, and that works cited page is in a consistent and sensible format. Some things to watch in there. I noticed in a lot of other ones, and especially this happens when you're using auto-generated formats, which is fine, like using EasyBib or something like that makes sense, but make sure that your author actually is listed like an author. So something like super user, that's not an author. Watch for things where like everything comes out in all caps. Well, that's not a part of a format style, right? That's a error in coding as people put their web page in and as it's gathering that information from the web page. So watch for those kind of minor errors. Those kind of obvious things you should change. Just be in the habit of double checking those kinds of things. Now, more importantly for our purposes is making sure we understand what we're doing as we are making our arguments here. So this, because we've spent more time now talking about argument structure for this speech, I'm going to be focusing a lot more on argument as you're putting it together. So we need, at the beginning here, a clear value thesis. And that value thesis should have a matter under consideration, and then it should have, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this, a problematic. That is a value. He's a great leader. So as you do that, the first thing you need to do to establish that Washington is a great leader is make sure that you've established the criteria. And this, kind of in the terms of logic of an outline, doesn't maybe necessarily seem like it flows as easily, but at some point you have to define what it means to be good leader, person, innovator, whatever it is you're using as your value, you need to establish that criteria at the beginning of your speech, whether that's kind of sort of positioned as part of your introduction or as a first main point, it doesn't matter, but needs to be at the beginning of the speech, and it should be listed at the beginning of the outline. So I'm just going to write that down here. State at the start of speech. Some people do work it into their introductions. Other people use it as their first point. And this is critical for outline. It's always going to be point 1 to make sure that it is in the right spot and that it's identified there. And so what I have done here, and this is kind of a useful sort of approach, it's not necessary, but it's very useful and makes it easier for you later on, is that I have 3 fundamental qualities for leadership. That the leader helps to, I'm going to kind of change my highlighter here, a leader helps to learn and improve, a leader is hardworking to improve others, and a leader displays strong moral character. So now as we go through my speech, you should see each of these main points. Washington is a lifelong learner. That fits right with a leader must learn to improve. My second main point, Washington dedicated his life to helping others, right? Comes right back to that second point there. And my third point, Washington displayed high moral character, goes back to this point here. One of the things that's really important about this is you'll notice that as I've gone through, I'm talking a lot about Washington. I'm even starting a little bit on his beginning of his life, and then I get into kind of his work life, and then I'm talking about his life as a whole. But what I am not doing, I'm going to put the not sign, is I'm not making a biography. This is not just the beginning of like Washington was born here, he went to school here, then he got a job doing this, and then he was a general, and then nope, not interested in that. I'm not interested in a biography. This isn't a biography speech. This is a speech meant to prove that he was a great leader. So my main points all have to come back to that idea that he was in fact a great leader. Now, as we get into each of these arguments, then you want to make sure that if I've got the idea that he was a lifelong learner, now I'm making another claim, and this is a fact claim, then I'm going to have to show or demonstrate in subordinate points that he worked hard in school. I've got some support for that. I've got that he learned from his work experiences and that he learned from his military experiences. And I should have some specific examples of that as I develop my speech. But I don't need to put everything in my outline. This is just the skeleton of that speech. As I get to this next part, he dedicated his life to helping others. I can see how he sacrificed to them, he fought for his troops, he sacrificed for his countrymen. All of those things speak to this idea of being dedicated, right? So each claim I'm developing and supporting just that main point, and I'm not focused on sort of the biography of a person. I'm focused primarily on making sure that those parts of his life are connected to the main point I'm trying to develop, which is also then connected back to the criteria, which is the connection back to the thesis. That sense of connecting each point is what's really critical in a speech like this. Now, in this last one, you'll notice that I'm making the claim that he displayed high moral character. Well, again, I don't have necessarily a clear fact claim that I'm working on. I'm doing another kind of value claim. So I've got to make sure that it's either clear as I'm explaining this point, what counts as good moral character, or as I go through and explain that he was honest, that he was humble, and that he placed others' needs before his own, that each one of those is a sign of high moral character. So as I'm delivering my speech, I might be able to explain what that criteria for moral character is, even though I didn't necessarily write out a separate point for it, right? I hope that makes sense, and I hope that if you run into questions and you're having trouble at all with your outline, talk to me about it, make a point of meeting with me to go over your outline so that we can make sure that your argument is sound and that it is valid and that you have a good, solid speech. Thanks.